A man sits in a rented room in the Roman colony of Corinth, rubbing tired eyes by the light of a flickering oil lamp. You picture a blinding light, the clouds rolling back, and a majestic angel pressing a pristine, polished brass instrument to his lips. Death does not honor the Yobel. Death keeps its slaves. Death is the ultimate landowner, holding on to every generation that falls into the dirt. In the 1st century, Paul sits in Corinth and stares at the ultimate oppressor. He stares at the grave. He is waiting for a jubilee that goes deeper than dirt. He is waiting for a sound that can vibrate through 6 feet of earth and unlock the crypts. To understand the horn Paul is waiting for, you have to look at what breath actually does to bone. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16. Paul is writing to a church drowning in grief, terrified that the believers they just buried in the dirt have missed out on the kingdom. And he gives them this anchor: for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. The word your English Bible translates as trumpet is the Greek noun salpinx. If you asked a Corinthian merchant on the street, the salpinx was a bronze military bugle. But Paul is a rabbi. His theological vocabulary is entirely governed by the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And when those Jewish scholars needed a Greek word for the Hebrew shofar, they chose salpinx. When Paul writes this letter, he is not picturing. You imagine something out of a Royal European court or a grand symphony orchestra, blasting a pure, metallic melody to wake the dead. A Roman soldier with a polished brass tube. He is picturing a priest with a harvested bone. And if you look at the physical mechanics of that bone, the metaphor explodes. A ram is slaughtered. Its horn is severed, boiled in scalding water, and violently scraped clean. The marrow and tissue are stripped away until nothing remains but a twisted, calcified shell. It is, by definition, an artifact of death, a relic of the slaughter, left on a table. The horn is entirely silent, but then a living man picks it up. He takes a deep intake of air. In biblical Hebrew, the word for breath is ruach, the exact same word used for spirit, for wind, for the divine presence that hovered over the dark waters of creation. The man presses his lips to the mouthpiece and forces his warm, living ruach into the cold, dead bone. The vibration of a living mouth hits the hollow chamber of a dead thing, and it produces a frequency that can shake a mountain. That changes everything about how you read Paul's promise to the grieving Thessalonians. When he writes about the trumpet of God waking the sleeping believers, he is not describing a musical performance in the clouds. He is pointing to the theological mechanics of the shofar itself. He is telling a weeping community that the death of their loved ones is not a permanent tragedy. Death has simply hollowed out the vessel. The grave is not. It is a beautiful image, but it is entirely wrong. If you step back from centuries of Western artwork and look closer, a final destination, it is an acoustic amplifier waiting for breath. The trumpet of God is not a brass bugle. It is the ruach of the Creator moving through the domain of the dead to bring them back to life. Just as the breath of God rushed into the dirt in Eden to make the first man a living soul, the breath of God will rush into the dust of the earth one final time, and the dead will rise. But Paul does not just say a trumpet will blow. When he writes to another church about this exact same event, he adds a chronological detail that has caused centuries of frantic debate. A wax seal snaps in the dim light. A heavy parchment unrolls. A reader clears his throat. The smell of crushed olives and damp wool fills a cramped, cold stone house in Corinth. The believers gather close. The crowd falls silent. They listen as the ink of Paul becomes a spoken word. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. The reader pauses. The phrase hangs in the air. The last trump, at the world Paul actually lived in. The image shatters. Paul was a Hebrew of Hebrews. His mind was entirely shaped by ancient Jewish texts and traditions. Modern readers obsess over this phrase. People build massive charts. They draw complicated timelines. They cross-reference Paul's letter with the book of Revelation, written decades later. Hunting for a sequence of 7 angels holding 7 horns, they treat the text like a mathematical equation to be solved. But Paul is not building a puzzle. He is completing a circle. The Jewish believers sitting in that Corinthian house church do not need a chart. They already know the vocabulary. In the ancient rabbinic traditions, there were 2 great trumpet blasts in human history. The tradition taught that both horns came from the single ram caught by its horns in the thicket on Mount Moriah, the substitute that saved Isaac from the knife. The left horn was blown on Mount Sinai. That was the first trump. It shook the mountain. It brought the law. It terrified the slaves. But the right horn was larger. It was kept for the end of the age. It would be blown by God Himself to gather the exiles, defeat death, and wake the sleeping bodies from the dirt. That was the last trump. When Paul uses this exact phrase, he is not introducing a new timeline. He is pointing to the climax of the story they have been telling for 1,000 years. The last trump is not a new event. It is the closing of an ancient parenthesis. When he penned the Greek word salpinx to these early Christians, he was not thinking of a gleaming Roman legion's bugle. The first trump demanded obedience. The last trump delivers resurrection. The first trump brought a terrifying fire. The last trump brings a permanent body. The law was given. The law was broken. The graves filled up. Generation after generation fell into the dust. Bones dried out. Tombs were sealed. The Roman Empire built its roads over the ashes of the saints. But the story was never meant to end in the dirt. The final blast is coming. The true Jubilee is approaching. The ultimate prison break is about to happen in the twinkling of an eye. But there is one more detail hiding in the original letter. To the Thessalonians, Paul does not just say the shofar will blow. He connects the blast to a specific voice. And when you look closely at how the sound is actually produced, the entire picture shifts. But there is a detail hiding in plain sight in the structure of Paul's sentence. Look again at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Paul layers 3 distinct acoustic events on top of each other. For the Lord Himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. We tend to read these as 3 separate noises in a sequence. He was thinking of something entirely different. Something jagged. Something asymmetrical. Something ripped from the skull of an animal. We imagine a shout. Then an angel speaking. Then a trumpet blowing. But Paul is not writing a chronological playlist. He is writing a Hebrew parallelism. The Greek word, translated as cry of command, is keliusma. It is a fascinating word. In the ancient Greco-Roman world, it was never used for a casual greeting or a musical performance. It was the sharp, violent shout of a shipmaster synchronizing a bank of heavy wooden oars hitting the water. It was the deafening cry of a charioteer cracking a whip over his horses in the heat of battle. It is a shout of supreme authority that demands immediate, physical compliance from everything that hears it. And this is where the physical anatomy of the shofar becomes crucial. When you blow into a modern brass instrument, valves and metal tubing reshape your air into melodic notes. The instrument fundamentally changes your breath into music. But a shofar does not have valves. It has no keys. It does not change the nature of the breath. It merely catches the raw, primal roar of the one holding it and amplifies it across the mountains. The trumpet of God is not an instrumental prelude. It is the vocal cord of the King. The trumpet of God is not a brass instrument. It is a piece of bone. And this is not just a trivia fact about ancient musical instruments. The shout, the voice, and the trumpet are not 3 different sounds. They are the exact same frequency, rippling out from the descending Lord. And we know exactly what this voice sounds like, because the New Testament has already recorded a localized version of it. In John chapter 11, Jesus stands outside a cave, holding a dead friend. The air smells of decomposition. The limestone is heavy and cold against the hands of the men rolling it away. Jesus does not whisper. He does not pray a quiet, contemplative prayer. The Greek text says he cries out with a loud voice, kraugazo, a violent, demanding shout, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man walks. That was a microburst. That was the breath of God, waking up a single, localized cave. The last trump is the macroburst. It is the Keliuzma, the shout of the commander amplified through the divine shofar, hitting every graveyard, every mausoleum, every battlefield, and every ocean floor on the planet simultaneously. It is the voice of the Creator, vibrating through the dust, commanding the scattered atoms of his people to reassemble. When you realize that the trumpet, the difference between a polished brass horn and a rugged ram's horn, changes how you read every single passage about the end of the age, is actually a voice, and that the voice is a resurrection command, the waiting feels entirely different. The fear of the grave begins to evaporate, and that changes what you do with your grief today. A father raised a knife over his son, and a ram caught in the thicket became the substitute. A mountain shook with smoke and fire, and the terrifying blast of a horn delivered the law. A priest blew a warning into the autumn air, and a sleeping nation woke up to prepare for the judge. A slave dropped his heavy plow in the dirt, and an ancient debt was entirely erased. A savior shouted into a dark limestone cave, and a dead man walked out in his grave clothes. An apostle wrote a letter to a grieving church and promised them the dirt would not hold their friends. And a king will descend with a final shout, and the graves of the earth will be emptied forever. One bone, one breath, one voice. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the bone itself. It changes what you think God is actually doing when he finally breaks open the sky. The trumpet is not a musical performance. Before the shofar can make a sound, a ram has to die. The marrow has to be violently scraped out. It has to be completely emptied by death before it can hold the breath of life. It is not a pristine, polished piece of Roman brass. It is an artifact of the slaughter. If you are in a season where you feel completely hollowed out, if you have been scraped clean by grief, by failure, or by the sheer weight of living in a world where the graves just keep filling up, do not mistake your emptiness for the end of the story. The hollowing is not a punishment. It is a preparation. You are not being abandoned in the dark. You are being turned into an acoustic chamber for the breath of God. And may the God who refuses to let the dirt have the final word breathe through the empty spaces of your life and wake you up to the sound of a king who is coming to empty the crypts. It is a breath blown through a dead thing to make it speak. To feel the weight of what Paul is really. The parchment in front of him is half full. Outside his window, the stone streets are silent, promising the grieving believers in Thessalonica. You cannot start with the Greek letters on his parchment. You have to look at the history of the instrument itself. You have to strip away the brass and examine the bone. The brass was what the Roman world knew. When Paul uses the Greek word salpinx in his letter, his Gentile readers might have immediately pictured the bronze instruments of the imperial legions. If you walked the streets of a first-century city, the sound of metal meant one of two things: the movement of troops or the arrival of a politician. The Roman tuba, or cornu, was a straight tube of hammered bronze, polished until it caught the bright Mediterranean sun, ending in a flared bell. It was a marvel of human engineering. Men extracted ore from the earth, melted it down in roaring fires, and shaped it to their exact specifications. It was designed to pierce the chaos of a battlefield with absolute, mathematical precision. It was the sound of the empire. But Paul is thinking in Hebrew, and the Hebrew mind operates on a completely different frequency. When the ancient texts of Israel speak of a trumpet, the word is almost always shofar, and a shofar requires no forge, save for the occasional clattering of a Roman soldier's armor on a midnight patrol. The air is thick with the damp cold of the Mediterranean Sea. It requires no hammer. It requires no human metallurgy at all. It requires a ram. And it requires a death. The shofar is not a manufactured tool. It is a harvested vessel. A shepherd takes the horn of a fallen ram, curved and rough, covered in thick ridges of keratin. He boils it in water to soften the cartilage. He scrapes out the marrow and the inner bone core, leaving only an empty, twisted chamber. The instrument is inherently imperfect. It is asymmetrical. It smells of the dust and of the flock. You cannot tune a shofar to a perfect concert pitch because it is an organic remnant of a living creature. It refuses to be standardized. To the Roman mind, the metal trumpet was a symbol of human supremacy. It was an announcement that man had conquered the elements, organized the world, and bent nature to his will. But to the Jewish mind, the shofar communicated the exact opposite. The shofar is not a declaration of what man has built. It is a reminder of what God has provided. It is the sound of substitution. Every time an ancient Israelite heard the blast of a ram's horn, but inside the mind of the Apostle Paul, there is a noise, a sound so loud, so earth-shattering. They were meant to remember a very specific moment on Mount Moriah, the moment a father named Abraham raised a knife over his son, only to be stopped by the sight of a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. The horn was the permanent, physical proof that God provides a way out of death. You take something that has died, you hollow it out, and you force your breath through it to make it speak again. But there is one place in the biblical narrative where the sound of this horn does not come from human lungs. There is a moment where the breath moving through the bone belongs to God Himself. And to hear it, you have to stand at the base of a burning mountain. Sand burns through leather sandals. A nation of former slaves stands paralyzed at the base of a jagged peak. Exodus chapter 19. It is the morning of the third day. A boundary line of rocks separates the trembling camp from the holy mountain. A boundary is drawn. A cloud drops. A fire ignites. Thunder cracks. Lightning fractures the dark sky. A thick, suffocating cloud drops onto the summit. Fire descends. Smoke billows upward like the exhaust of a massive furnace. The ground physically shakes under their feet, that he is struggling to find the right Greek words to capture it. He is writing to a group of grieving friends hundreds of miles away. And then, cutting through the thunder, comes an entirely different sound. The text of Exodus describes it as the voice of a horn. The shofar. But there is no priest on the mountain. There is no human mouth pressed against a hollowed bone. The blast is deafening. It echoes off the Red Canyon walls. It vibrates in the teeth and the chest cavities of 2 million terrified refugees. And the Hebrew text includes a physical detail that defies all laws of acoustics. The sound does not fade. Human breath runs out. Human lungs empty. A priest blows a horn, and the sound inevitably decays into the wind. But this sound disobeys nature. It grows louder, and louder, and louder, because the lungs behind this blast are not human. This is the breath of God. This is the first time the shofar appears in the biblical text. It does not originate in a religious ritual. It does not begin as a human invention. It begins in the thick, terrifying darkness of Sinai. The Israelites cannot handle it. They cover their ears. They fall to their knees. They are convinced that if they hear the raw, unfiltered blast for one more second, they will die. They beg Moses to make it stop. They pull back from the boundary line. Moses walks forward into the darkness. In Thessalonica, people who have just buried their loved ones, people who are terrified that death has won the final victory. The sound at Sinai is not a warning siren. It is the acoustic signature of an open sky. God speaks, and the vibration is a shofar. When the barrier between the divine realm and the human realm fractures, the frequency it produces is the blast of a ram's horn. The mountain eventually quiets. The smoke clears. The nation packs up their tents, turns their backs to the peak, and walks out into the wasteland. But that sound is permanently burned into their neurology, and God makes sure they never stop listening for it. He builds the memory of that blast into the very fabric of their year. He mandates an elaborate calendar of festivals, but he does not just want them looking backward at the fire of Sinai. There is a detail hiding in plain sight in the autumn feasts. Leviticus chapter 23 lays out the rhythm of the Jewish year. It is a calendar built on the turning of agricultural seasons, But it is also a prophetic map. The spring feasts are anchored to clear, tangible historical events. Passover points backward to the blood smeared on the doorposts in Egypt. The Feast of Unleavened Bread remembers the unbaked dough slung over their shoulders. In the hasty exit, Pentecost commemorates the terrifying fire coming down on Mount Sinai. But then the biblical calendar goes silent for months. Summer passes. He dips his reed pen. He writes about the return of the Lord. He writes about a shout, the voice of an archangel. The fields grow heavy. And then, on the first day of the 7th month, the autumn feasts open with an anomaly. It is called Yom Teruah. Your English Bible likely translates it as the Feast of Trumpets. But the Hebrew word teruah does not mean trumpet at all. It means a massive shout, an alarm, an earth-shattering blast. The strange thing about Yom Teruah is that the text gives almost no explanation for it. God simply commands the nation to stop working and blast the horns. He never tells them why. There is no historical event attached to it in the law, no memory of an ancient battle to recall, no specific deliverance to commemorate. It is an empty vessel. So the priests stand in the dry autumn air and press the bone to their lips. They blow the shofar not to remember what has happened, but to announce what is coming. The rabbis taught that the first trump blew at Sinai to give the law, but that another horn was waiting, a final blast. Yom Teruah is not a memorial of the past. It is a dress rehearsal for the future. It is an acoustic wake-up call to the soul. It is a violent shaking of the air, designed to jolt the people awake for the solemn Day of Atonement that arrives 10 days later. The teruah is the sound of the judge approaching the courtroom. The blast is meant, and then he uses a phrase that will echo through the next 2,000 years of human history. The trumpet of God, to make you drop what you are holding and pay attention. But there is one specific autumn, arriving only once a generation, where the blast of that horn does not just wake the sleeping, it shatters the chains of the living. A man stands in a field that no longer belongs to him. The sun beats down on his blistered neck. His hands grip a heavy wooden plow. The soil is hard, baked by the Levantine summer. Rain fails. Debt grows. Land is lost. A family fractures. He is tired. He is trapped. Years ago, the crops failed. The debts piled up. And he sold his ancestral land. He sold his labor. He sold himself. His children sleep in a servant's quarters. His name is owned by another man. It is the 10th day of the 7th month. It is the Day of Atonement. The high priest steps out of the sanctuary. He holds the hollowed bone of a ram. He brings it to his lips. He pulls the autumn air deep into his lungs. He blows. The sound hits the temple courtyard. It echoes down the Kidron Valley. It rolls over the Judean hills. It reaches the wealthy landowner in his stone house. It reaches the slave sweating in the furrow. The vibration hits his chest. The plow drops to the dirt. You have probably pictured this moment. Most people do. You read this passage and imagine the sky splitting open like a scroll. The debt ledger is erased. The chains fall off. This is the 50th year. This is the Jubilee. In Hebrew, the word is Yobel. The word literally translates to ram's horn. The entire year of release is named after the instrument that announces it. When the shofar blows on this specific afternoon, the world flips upside down. The rich man loses his grip. The poor man walks home. The property lines are erased. The exiles return to the inheritance of their fathers. 49 years of accumulation. Then, a single breath changes everything. The trumpet is not a musical performance. It is a legal decree. It is the sound of an ancient debt being canceled in real time. It is a total system reset. Every twisted social structure, every unfair advantage, every generational curse is wiped clean by the vibration of bone and breath. You hear the horn. You drop your tools. You walk free. But this horn only frees the living. It only cancels financial debts. It only liberates bodies that still have warm blood pumping through their veins. The man working the field gets to go home, but the man buried under the field remains trapped.